She stood at the top of the marble staircase in a dress that cost more than most people's monthly rent, champagne flute raised toward the chandelier light, and laughed. Not the polite, restrained laugh of a woman at a wedding. A full, head-thrown-back laugh, aimed directly across the room at the man standing near the garden doors, in a simple navy suit that he'd pressed himself the night before. That man was Daniel O'Say, and the woman laughing at him was Renata, his ex-wife of 7 years, the mother of their daughter, and the person who had spent the better part of a decade telling anyone who would listen that Daniel O'Say was nothing, a disappointment. A man whose ambitions were larger than his abilities, whose quiet manner was really just a lack of drive, dressed up as dignity. What Renata did not know, what none of the people laughing politely alongside her knew, was that the marble staircase she stood on, the chandelier throwing light across her champagne flute, the catering staff moving through the crowd with silver trays, the garden beyond the French doors, the very building that housed 300 guests for his daughter's wedding, all of it belonged to Daniel O'Say, every square foot of it. His name was on the deed, had been for 4 years. And tonight, at his daughter Amara's wedding, the truth was going to arrive exactly on schedule. Before we go any further into this story, I want to ask, where are you watching from right now? Drop your city in the comments because this community stretches further than I ever imagined, and I love knowing who's here with us. If this is your first time on this channel, welcome. Hit that subscribe button, because the stories we tell here are the ones that remind you that patience is never wasted, and if you've been here before, you already know. Stay with me. This one earned its ending. 7 years before Amara's wedding, Daniel O'Say had been a structural engineer with a solid but unremarkable career, a modest townhouse in the east side of the city, and a marriage that was quietly coming apart at its foundations, the way old buildings do. Process. Not with a dramatic collapse, but with hairline cracks spreading through the walls, while everyone pretends the house is fine. He and Renata had married young. He was 26, she was 24, and in the beginning, they had been genuinely happy, or at least, they had been too busy building a life to notice how differently they defined happiness. Daniel found satisfaction in steady progress, in work done carefully, in the particular pleasure of a plan executed well. Renata found satisfaction in arrival, in being seen to have arrived. Corks. In the acknowledgement of others that yes, you have made it, you belong here, look at what you have become. These are not incompatible desires in a marriage. Plenty of people bridge them, but they require honest conversation, mutual respect, and a shared understanding that different people measure success differently. What they found instead, as the years passed and Renata's social ambitions accelerated beyond what Daniel's salary could comfortably support, was a growing contempt on her part and a growing withdrawal on his. By the time Amara was 4 years old, the contempt had become architectural, built into the structure of their daily life. Renata had taken a position with a property development firm, the kind of firm that threw lavish client dinners and measured professional worth by the value of your table at a charity gala, and she had begun to bring that measuring stick home with her. Daniel was earning well. He was respected by his colleagues, trusted by his firm, good at what he did, but he did not earn in the way that Renata's new social world valued. He did not perform well. He did not network over scotch at expensive bars, or drop the names of clients who moved in elevated circles. He was, in the language of Renata's professional world, understated. And understated, she had decided, was just a polite word for insufficient. The divorce, when it finally came, was less of a shock to Daniel than the terms Renata proposed. She wanted the townhouse. She wanted primary custody of Amara, with Daniel receiving alternating weekends and 2 weeks in summer. She wanted child support at the upper range of the guidelines. And she wanted, this was the part that stayed with Daniel longest, for him to acknowledge, in their mediated settlement conversation, that the failure of the marriage had been substantially his fault, not legally, just personally. She wanted him to say it. He did not say it. He agreed to nearly everything else because he understood, with the clarity of a man who had spent years watching a building deteriorate and finally accepted that the building was coming down, that fighting Renata in court would cost Amara more than it would cost either of them. He agreed to the house. He agreed to the custody arrangement, though it broke something in him quietly. He paid the child support without delay or complaint for every single month of the years that followed. But he did not say what she wanted him to say, and she did not forgive him for that. In the years following the divorce, Daniel moved into a one-bedroom apartment, drove a 12-year-old car, and ate lunch at his desk most days. From the outside, particularly from Renata's outside, this looked like confirmation. He had been reduced to what she always suspected. He was a man going nowhere, slowly. From the inside, Daniel was building. He had, during the final difficult years of the marriage, been quietly consulting on the side, taking small structural assessment projects for private clients in the evenings and on weekends, building a portfolio, nurturing professional relationships, earning a reputation in a specific niche of the industry where he had developed genuine expertise, the assessment and renovation of historical properties, old buildings with complicated bones. The ones that other firms turned away because the liability felt too uncertain, the structural puzzles too idiosyncratic. Daniel loved them. He understood them the way you understand a language you've been speaking your whole life without realizing it was a language. By the time his divorce was finalized, his consulting work was generating nearly as much income as his primary salary. Within 18 months, it had exceeded it. He resigned from his firm, formally incorporated his own practice, and by the time Amara started primary school, Daniel Osei's firm was the consultancy that 3 of the city's most prestigious restoration projects had on speed dial. He did not tell Renata. Not out of deception. She had no legal claim to his professional success once the divorce was final, but because telling Renata would have meant engaging with Renata, and engaging with Renata meant being subjected to the particular brand of analysis she applied to everything in his life. He did not want her analysis. He wanted to work. The child support payments continued. Always on time, always the court-ordered amount. His car remained modest. His apartment eventually became a house, a quiet house in an unfashionable neighborhood. And when Amara came to stay, it was full of the things she loved. A corner stacked with art supplies, a kitchen that always smelled of whatever they were cooking together, a garden that was chaotic and colorful, and absolutely nothing like the manicured lawn of the townhouse she lived in with her mother. Amara grew up knowing both worlds. She was perceptive in the way children of divorced parents often are, finely tuned to the emotional frequencies of the adults around her. She felt the ease in her father's house and the tension in her mother's. She felt the way her mother spoke about her father, never in front of Amara directly, but in that way adults sometimes forget that children have ears that function, even in adjacent rooms. She heard the word disappointing. She heard the phrase never really amounted to much. She heard her mother tell a friend once that she could have done so much better. Amara never said this to her father, but she carried it the way children carry these things. In a small, locked room in the center of themselves, when Amara was 16, she told Daniel she wanted to be an architect. He had wept very privately in his car in the driveway after dropping her home from a pride so enormous it had nowhere else to go. When Amara was 23, she became engaged to Marcus Webb, a kind, thoughtful man who taught secondary school mathematics and loved Amara with a steadiness that Daniel recognized and respected. Marcus was not flashy. He was not wealthy. He was precisely the kind of man Renata had decided, years ago, was not enough, which meant he was exactly the kind of man Daniel had always hoped his daughter would find. The wedding planning began, and, with it, the first major collision in 7 years. Renata, who had remarried in the interim, a man named Clifford, a property developer of considerable wealth and even more considerable self-regard, arrived at the planning process with the energy of a military commander and the budget assumptions of someone who believed that a wedding's worth could be measured in its catering invoice. She had opinions about venues, specific opinions. The kind of venue she envisioned was the kind that announced, clearly and without ambiguity, that the people hosting this wedding belonged to a certain class. She had, in fact, already identified the venue she wanted, a restored Victorian estate on the western edge of the city that had been meticulously renovated over the previous 3 years and had recently opened as an event space. She had seen it at a charity function hosted there the previous autumn and had immediately decided it was the venue for Amara's wedding. Grand ballroom, original marble staircase, crystal chandeliers, formal gardens, the kind of architectural bones that made other venues look like pleasant rooms by comparison. She had inquired about booking it and discovered to her particular pleasure that it was exclusively available only through direct arrangement with the ownership group. No public booking portal, no event management agency as intermediary. You had to know someone who could reach the owners. Renata, who prided herself on knowing people, reached out through her contacts in the property development world, and the answer came back, yes, the venue would be available. The ownership group would be in touch to discuss details. She told Amara about the venue at Sunday dinner, Clifford's Sunday dinner in Clifford's house, the kind of dinner that was really a performance of abundance, with the satisfied expression of someone presenting a gift they know cannot be matched. Amara, who had her father's particular quality of stillness when she was processing something complex, listened, smiled, and said she would like her father to be involved in the venue decision. Renata's expression shifted fractionally. Just fractionally, she called Daniel that evening. Not warmly, they did not do warmth, but with the careful civility of two people who had agreed, years ago, that their daughter deserved parents who could be in the same room. She described the venue. She described how she had secured access to it. She described in sufficient detail that the accomplishment was clear, what it would mean for Amara's wedding to be held at a venue of that caliber. Daniel listened. He said very little. At the end of the call, he said, "Send me the address. I'll look into it." Renata interpreted this as acquiescence, as she usually did with Daniel's silences. She was not familiar enough with him anymore to know the difference between his silence of deference and his silence of strategy. The engagement party, thrown by Renata and Clifford 3 months before the wedding, was the first gathering at which all parties were present together, and Clifford's house, Clifford's catering, Clifford's friends, filling the living room and garden with the particular volume of people who were accustomed to being catered to. Daniel arrived punctually with a small gift for Amara and Marcus that he'd spent genuine time choosing, and was greeted at the door by Clifford in the way a host greets a guest he does not quite consider a peer. The handshake that was a fraction too firm, held a beat too long, the smile that was really an assessment. "Daniel," Clifford said, "good that you could make it," as if Daniel's presence at his own daughter's engagement party were a kindness Daniel was extending to the occasion rather than a right. "Marcus tells me you're in structural work," Clifford continued, steering Daniel toward the bar in the way that suggested he intended to place him there and leave him there. "Consulting, is it?" "That's right," Daniel said. "Good, good." Clifford nodded in the way people nod when they are not listening to what has been said, but rather to how it was said, whether it contained the correct markers of ambition and scale. "Renata says you've had your own firm for a few years now." "Several years, yes. Boutique operation." The word boutique was not a compliment in Clifford's vocabulary. It meant small, manageable, appropriate to a certain level. "We work on projects that suit us," Daniel said simply. Renata materialized at Clifford's elbow in the way she had always had a talent for appearing exactly when her presence would most reinforce whatever dynamic was already in play. She was immaculate. She was always immaculate. She had the particular beauty of someone who has decided their appearance is a professional instrument and treats it accordingly. "Daniel," she said, "I'm glad you came." "She's happy," Daniel said, watching Amara across the room with Marcus. the way her face moved when she was laughing at something he said. That's what matters. Of course, Renata said, then pivoting with the smoothness of long practice. I've had confirmation from the venue's contact. They're being wonderfully accommodating. It's going to be extraordinary. I'm sure it will be, Daniel said. He did not say more. He stood by the bar, speaking when spoken to, watching his daughter be happy, and letting the evening flow around him the way water flows around a stone. Not because he was without feeling, but because he had learned over many years that this particular environment was designed to make him feel diminished, and that the most powerful response to that design was simply not to inhabit it. He left at a polite hour, embraced Amara, shook Marcus's hand and held it with both of his, and drove home. In his home office, he opened his laptop and sent a brief email to the director of client relations at his firm. The subject line was, Amara's wedding venue. Final confirmation details. The response came the next morning. Everything was in order, the venue was booked, the date was secured, under the name Osei. The weeks leading to the wedding were occupied with the particular chaos of logistics, catering decisions, floral arrangements, the seating chart that required the diplomatic precision of a peace negotiation, the dress fittings, the rehearsal coordination. Renata was, by any measure, a formidable wedding planner when she chose to apply herself to something. She had opinions, and she pursued them with the efficiency of someone who had learned that social outcomes rewarded decisive action. Daniel participated where Amara wanted him, provided input when asked, wrote the checks that were his responsibility without comment, and navigated the planning meetings, 3 of them, held at Clifford's house, with the same composed stillness he brought to every professional situation. At the second planning meeting, Clifford had made a remark that lodged itself somewhere beneath Daniel's sternum. They had been discussing the wedding program, specifically the acknowledgement of parents, and Clifford had suggested, in the light-hearted tone of a man who believes his jokes are always welcome, that perhaps the program should distinguish between parents who had really made this day possible and those who had contributed what they could. The room had laughed. Renata had smiled. Amara had looked at her father. Daniel had looked back at her and done something small with his expression. The faintest elevation at the corner of his mouth that meant, I see it. I'm all right. Don't let it take anything from you tonight. Amara had held his gaze for a moment longer than necessary, then turned back to the conversation. She was her father's daughter in more ways than Renata had ever bothered to understand. The morning of the wedding arrived with the particular brightness of an October day that has decided, against the seasonal odds, to be generous. The light came through the venue's tall windows in angles that turned every surface golden, and the old building, the Victorian estate that Renata had been so proud of securing, accepted the morning with the dignity of something that had been waiting a long time to be seen at its best. The catering staff arrived early and moved through the space with the efficiency of a team that knew the building intimately. The floral arrangements, abundant, architectural, the kind that look effortless only because of how much care they required, were placed with instructions from the head florist who had worked with the venue's ownership group on multiple occasions. The marble staircase was polished to a depth that made the light seem to come from within the stone itself. Daniel arrived an hour before the guests, dressed in his pressed navy suit, and stood for a moment in the main hallway, looking up at the chandelier. He had overseen the restoration of the electrical systems that kept it lit. He had been on site the day the original fixtures were carefully cleaned and restrung. He had signed the restoration assessment that certified the building's structural integrity before a single event was held within its walls. His name was on the deed, had been since the ownership group, of which his firm was the majority stakeholder, acquired when the building was a distressed asset that no one else believed could be saved, had purchased it 4 years ago. He touched the wall near the doorway, just briefly, a habit from years of assessing old buildings, feeling for what was there. Everything was solid. Everything was exactly as he had built it to be. Amara found him there before anyone else arrived. She was not yet in her dress. That would come later, upstairs in the bridal suite, and she was wearing a simple robe, her hair half finished, and she looked exactly like herself, which was to say, she was both the child he had taken to school on alternating Mondays for years, and the adult who had become through her own diligence and talent. "A woman worth knowing. You're early?" she said. "I'm always early." She stood beside him, looking at the hallway with an architect's eye. He could tell by the angle of her gaze, the way it tracked structure rather than surface. "Dad," she said, "this is the venue you own, isn't it?" It was not quite a question. He looked at her. "It is." She was quiet for a moment. Then, "Does Mum know?" "Not yet." Another silence. Amara nodded slowly. The way she nodded when she was processing something that was both surprising and, now that she knew it, completely inevitable. "Were you ever going to tell her before today? I thought today was the right time." Amara looked at him. Something moved through her expression, complicated and layered, and finally at its bottom, something that might have been quiet amusement. "She thinks she arranged this venue herself." "I know. Sif. She's told people she arranged it. Clifford's people, her colleagues." "I know that too." Amara was quiet. Then she said, "Did you know it was the venue she wanted when she first suggested it?" "I knew the moment she described it on the phone." "And you didn't say anything?" "No." Amara absorbed this. "Why today?" Daniel was quiet for a long moment, choosing. "Because today is your day, not mine, not hers. Whatever happens today, I want you to remember that you were loved well by both your parents, differently, imperfectly, but genuinely. What I didn't want was for the way I was spoken about in this building to be the way things stayed. Your husband and your children, if you have them, will hear stories about who I am. I wanted at least one of those stories to be true." Amara took his hand, squeezed it once, let it go. "Go get ready," he said. "You're getting married today." She walked toward the staircase, and Daniel watched her go. And the building held them both in its restored and solid bones. And the October light continued to be generous. The guests arrived in the way guests always arrive, in clusters, in pairs, in the complex social formations of people who know each other and people who are discovering they should. Renata arrived with Clifford and a small constellation of her closest allies. Her sister Denise, two of her professional colleagues, whose names Daniel had never properly learned, and a friend named Paulette, who had been nodding along to Renata's opinions since they were 20 years old. Renata moved through the venue with the proprietary ease of someone who believes they have had a hand in creating a space. She touched surfaces. She gestured at architectural details when pointing things out to Clifford. She accepted compliments from guests about the choice of venue with a gracious modesty that was really just satisfaction, wearing a polite coat. She found it through her contacts, Denise explained to another guest within Daniel's hearing range, though Daniel was not near enough for this to be intentional. "You know, Renata, she always knows people." Daniel was standing near the garden doors, speaking quietly with Marcus's parents, who were warm and uncomplicated people from a smaller city who had arrived the previous evening and were visibly delighted by everything they saw. He heard Denise's comment and felt nothing in particular, which was its own kind of answer. When you have been waiting long enough for something, the arrival of the moment creates not excitement, but clarity. Renata spotted him across the room. She made her way toward him, with Clifford at her shoulder, and she was already wearing the expression, the one he recognized from 7 years of marriage and 7 more of cautious co-parenting. That meant she had something she intended to say and had been composing it for some time. "Daniel," she said warmly, in front of Clifford's friends, "are you enjoying the venue?" "Very much," he said. "It's spectacular, isn't it? I have to say, when I managed to get us access to a private venue like this, even I was surprised by how well it came together." She paused to let the compliment, to herself, settle. Sometimes the connections you build over the years pay off in the most wonderful ways. Clifford made a sound of agreement that was somewhere between a word and a satisfied hum. Daniel nodded. He said the building has an interesting history. Does it? I know it's Victorian era. The bones are extraordinary. They are. The structural restoration took nearly 2 years. The original staircase had significant damage in the lower balustrade, very subtle, the kind of thing a visual inspection would miss. You'd need a detailed structural assessment to identify it. Renata blinked. Well, yes, I'm sure. They've done a remarkable job. The firm that led the restoration also assessed the electrical systems, the foundation drainage, and the east wing load-bearing modifications. Daniel continued. The work is detailed in the restoration certificate that was filed when the building received its event use licensing. There was something in his manner, patient, informational, absolutely without heat, that had begun to register on Clifford, if not yet on Renata. Clifford had spent enough time around professional men to recognize when one was pacing himself toward something. Are you familiar with the firm? Clifford asked. There was a new quality in his voice. Calibration. Quite familiar, Daniel said. It's my firm. The sentence landed without drama. That was the thing about quiet bombs. They were not loud. They simply rearranged everything in their immediate vicinity by the change in pressure. Renata's expression underwent a rapid internal revision that she did not quite manage to complete before it was visible. Surprise. Reassessment. Something that flickered toward discomfort before being pressed firmly back toward composure. Your firm did the restoration, she said, among other things. Well, she said, what a coincidence. Not entirely, Daniel said. The ownership group that purchased this building 4 years ago is majority held by my firm. We've run it as an event venue for 2 years now. The contact your office reached out to when you were seeking access to the venue is our director of client relations. She expedited the booking, Daniel continued, because the bride is my daughter. The air around their small group had taken on a particular quality. 2 of Renata's colleagues had drifted close enough to be within earshot, without quite being close enough to be obviously listening. Renata's champagne flute was very still in her hand. So, she said slowly, working through it. When I called you about the venue, you already knew. Yes, you didn't say anything, you didn't ask. A longer silence. Clifford touched Renata's elbow, very briefly, a signal between them that Daniel could read even from the outside. Let this go. But Renata had never been particularly good at receiving that signal, and 7 years of distance had not changed that. I spent 3 months coordinating this venue, she said. Her voice was still controlled, but the control was visible now, like scaffolding on a building. You could see the structure that was holding the surface in place. I told my colleagues, that I had arranged this. You did arrange it, Daniel said. Your office made the inquiry. Our client relations team responded the booking was made. Everything you did, you did. I'm not disputing any of that. But you own it, yes. She stared at him. Then, with a quality that was not quite bitterness and not quite wonder, but something that lived between them. How long have you owned it? 4 years. And, before that, I acquired it as a distressed asset. The building had been vacant for 11 years. 3 separate buyers had assessed it and walked away. Our firm saw the structural value that the surveys had missed. Clifford cleared his throat. It was not a subtle sound. It was the sound of a man recalibrating his understanding of the person across from him in real time and finding the process uncomfortable. What's the portfolio worth? Clifford asked with the directness of a man for whom money is the clearest language. The firm's or the property assets specifically. Clifford looked at him. Both are doing well, Daniel said simply. And then, because the moment had arrived, because patience had always been his method, and here was the arrival of a patience maintained for years, he said, Renata, I would like to enjoy our daughter's wedding. I would like for you to enjoy it too. Whatever has been said about me over these years, in this room and outside it, tonight, I'd ask you to set it down. Today is Amara's day. We gave her someone worth marrying. That's enough. Renata stood very still. The champagne flute was still in her hand. Behind her, through the tall windows, the October garden was lit with strings of warm light that had been installed by a crew that Daniel's team had coordinated. The flowers on every surface had been selected with input from a florist his firm used for all their events. She opened her mouth, closed it. "Of course," she said at last. Her voice was quieter. "Of course it is." It was not an apology. It would not be an apology. Renata was not, in this moment, capable of what an apology actually required, which is an honest accounting of what has been done. But it was something. It was the beginning of a woman encountering the evidence of how thoroughly she had misjudged something and perhaps someone that she thought she understood completely. Clifford reached for her elbow again. This time she let him steer her away. She needed, Daniel understood, to be in a place where she could reconstitute herself, to gather her composure back around herself like a coat. He did not follow. He let her go. Marcus's father appeared beside him. "Everything all right?" "Everything is excellent," Daniel said. The ceremony was held in the garden, under a sky that had kept its promise all day. Amara came down the marble staircase, the one Renata had stood at the top of, laughing, on Daniel's arm, and she was so beautiful that the crowd of 300 people made a sound, almost in unison, that was not quite a gasp and not quite a sigh, but something that acknowledged beauty when it arrived in a room. Daniel walked her down the aisle of the garden, through the rows of guests, toward Marcus, who was standing at the front, with the particular expression of a man who cannot quite believe his own luck and has decided to be grateful for it every single day. Daniel placed Amara's hand in Marcus's. He looked at the young man, this steady, kind, sufficient young man, and he said quietly, just between the three of them in the moment before the ceremony formally began, "Take care of her the way she deserves." "I will," Marcus said, and meant it. Daniel took his seat in the front row, on the left, where the father of the bride sits, and he watched his daughter become a wife, and the building held them all. Afterward, after the vows, after the first dance, after the dinner, after the speeches in which Amara spoke about both her parents with the careful equity of a woman who loves complicated people, Renata found Daniel in the corridor, outside the ballroom. The party was still going, the music audible through the doors, but out here it was quiet. She had shed some of the evening's composure. Not broken it, she was too controlled for that, but some of the architectural scaffolding had come down. She looked tired. She looked for the first time in a long time like the woman he had married at 26, before the accumulation of years and ambition and comparison had built something harder over her. "I owe you an apology," she said. He looked at her. "Several, probably," she added, "over the years. I said things, not to you, or not only to you, to other people about you." She paused. "Amara knows. I think you know." "I know," he said. "I told myself it was true." "That you had been." She stopped, looked at the wall beside him, then back. It was easier to believe a story than to admit that things went wrong because of both of us. And I chose the version where the problem was you. Daniel was quiet, listening. "You built something extraordinary," she said. "You were building it while I was telling people you hadn't." She said it without drama, which made it land with more weight than drama would have. "I don't know what you need from me. I'm not sure I can give an apology that covers all of it." "I don't need you to cover all of it," Daniel said. "I need you to tell Amara the truth when she asks you about her father. That's all I've ever needed." Renata absorbed that. Nodded once, slowly. "She already knows the truth," she said. "She figured it out on her own." "She's perceptive," Daniel said. "She always has been." A small, genuine thing crossed Renata's face. Not a smile. Exactly. Recognition. "She's like you," she said. "She's patient. And then she acts." He let that sit between them. "I'm going back in," he said. "My daughter is dancing." He left Renata in the corridor and pushed back through the doors into the warmth and light and noise, and found Amara on the dance floor, laughing at something Marcus had said, and he stood at the edge and watched her with the specific private fullness of a father who has kept faith with something for many years and is seeing, tonight, what it has produced. Denise appeared beside him. Renata's sister, who had heard as it emerged throughout the evening, the way things always emerge at weddings, through whispered conversations that travel the room with the speed of music, a version of the corridor conversation secondhand, and who was now looking at Daniel with an expression that was somewhere between assessment and respect. "I told Renata for years that she underestimated you," she said. "Did you?" he said. "She didn't listen. Renata never listens to me." A pause. She listens to events, evidence, proof. She glanced at the room around them, the chandelier, the marble, the gathered beauty of the evening. "Tonight was quite a lot of proof. Tonight was my daughter's wedding," Daniel said. "The rest was coincidental." Denise looked at him with the look of a woman who does not believe in coincidences, but decides in this moment not to argue the point. In the weeks that followed the wedding, certain things shifted. Not dramatically. Real life rarely shifts as cleanly as a story would suggest, but meaningfully. Renata stopped making comments about Daniel to Amara, which Amara noticed and mentioned to her father on the phone, with the careful casualness of someone reporting something they hope is permanent but are not yet ready to fully trust. Clifford, who operated in overlapping professional circles with Daniel's firm, reached out through an intermediary about a potential project collaboration, a distressed commercial property that his development company had been unable to move forward on because of persistent structural concerns. Daniel's firm agreed to assess it. The assessment took 3 weeks. The report was thorough, technically detailed, and exactly the quality of work that Daniel's firm was known for delivering. Clifford's office sent a thank you note, handwritten, which surprised Daniel, that said, among other things, that he had not previously appreciated the depth of the firm's expertise, and that he hoped there might be opportunities to work together going forward. Daniel wrote back, briefly, professionally. He left the door open. He was, at his foundation, a man who believed in building things rather than burning them. He had never wanted Renata's humiliation. He had wanted, for 7 years, what he had told Amara he wanted, for at least one story about him to be true. That story now existed. It had been witnessed by 300 people in a building he owned on the night his daughter became a wife. The building was still standing, solid at its foundations, exactly as he had assessed it would be. Daniel Osei drove home that night through the quiet city window slightly open, October air cool against his face, and he felt not triumph, exactly, not satisfaction, in any simple sense. He felt the particular quiet that comes when something you have worked toward for a very long time has finally fully arrived, and you discover that what it feels like at its core is not noise or celebration, but simple, uncomplicated peace. He had built something. He had held his integrity through the years when holding it cost him the comfort of being understood. He had been present for his daughter in every way that was available to him, and she had grown up knowing it, even when other stories tried to crowd it out. He had been patient, and the patience had not been wasted, and the building had held. Some structures look ordinary from the outside, unremarkable, understated even. You'd walk past them without a second glance if you were the kind of person who judged buildings by their exterior. But the people who know how to read what's underneath, who understand that the value is in the bones, in the integrity of the foundation, in the decades of careful, honest work that no surface can reveal, those people know. You cannot fake what holds a building up. You cannot perform structural integrity. Either it's there or it isn't. Daniel Osei's was there. It had always been there. The city moved around his car, indifferent and beautiful, and he drove home. That is the story of Daniel and the building he built in every sense of that word. And I'll tell you what it leaves me, with a conviction that the most dangerous thing you can do to a person who underestimates you is simply to keep going. Keep building, keep showing up for the people who matter. Let the evidence accumulate in its own time. The revelation is so much more powerful when it arrives on its own without you having announced it. If this story stayed with you today, I'd ask you two things. First, hit that like button. It tells the algorithm that this kind of storytelling is worth sharing, and it genuinely helps us reach more people who need to hear that patience and integrity are not weaknesses. Second, subscribe if you haven't. We are here every week with stories like this one, stories about people who were counted out and kept going anyway. And tell me in the comments, have you ever been underestimated by someone who later had to reckon with how wrong they were? What did that moment feel like? I read every comment, every one. Until next time, keep building.